do you believe in ghosts? I suppose we've all seen something or heard something or felt a strange sensation sometime in our lives, and we've not known quite what it was. It hasn't made sense. But was it a ghost? Probably not. There are explanations for all these sort of things. But what if you saw a person, an actual person, and afterwards you thought, was it a person or was it a ghost? In 1987, I was asked to do a survey on a building in Arbroath at 105 to 109 High Street. It's still there. At the time, Mr. Webster asked me to draw up plans for it. And lo and behold, I've still got the survey notes, all handwritten dimensions and notes, and I've even got some of the drawings, the old plans. And as part of the survey, I had to go right through the building, checking everything, the structure, the sizes, because the whole building was going to be gutted and developed into 2 shops downstairs and flats up above. It's still there if you want to go and have a look. And as part of my survey, I began right at the very top in the attic. And the attic was full of junk, mostly old drawings. Apparently an architect's office used to be there. Carver, Simon and Ross. And all their old drawings going back over 100 years were all just thrown up in the loft. And when I was there in 1987, Mr. Webster was throwing them all out into the backyard, and he had a big bonfire going. They're all getting burnt. I thought a few of them looked rather interesting, and I said, look, do you mind if I take some of these? He says, grab them now. He says, they're all going on the bonfire. So I grabbed some. Quite interesting old architect's drawings and some old maps as well. This is one of the old maps, a 1903 street plan of Arbroath. Really interesting stuff. And I looked through later on some of these drawings and plans. They were quite interesting, but there was one that wasn't interesting. I don't know why I picked it up. It's just a plain paper drawing. It was covered with dust, and it wasn't until 3 years later in 1990 that I got round to having a look at it again. I'd probably looked at everything else except this, and when I wiped the dust off of it and looked, it said locus of accident at Wellgate Level Crossing. And I opened it up, and inside wasn't particularly exciting. It's again just a pencil drawing, but it shows the level crossing just to the north side of Arbroath railway station, about 200 yards to the north. There's a signal box and a level crossing and a footbridge. This drawing showed some broken lines, and it seemed to be 2 alternative routes that a man called White had possibly walked along. What was this all about? In the bottom corner there was a date, 24th October 1921. So, what do you do with that information? You go along to your local library and try and find out what happened in 1921 that might have involved a man called White or a person called White. And what I found in 1990 was an old Arbroath Herald from which I photocopied this. And it started off by saying Arbroath labourer's tragic death. Inquiry in Sheriff Court. A conflict of evidence. Jury's verdict and rider. This is starting to sound interesting. Especially a conflict of evidence. So, I started reading through the Arbroath Herald. And this is basically what it told me, that Sheriff Gordon sat over this inquiry into the death of William White, who was 66 years old, from 20 Fergus Street, Arbroath, and he was a foundry labourer at Fraser's. And he was killed on the 12th of September 1921. How was he killed? Well, he was killed by crossing the railway line. But how could that have happened? Because there was a signal box where the signalman controlled, obviously, the signals, and the big gates at the level crossing, big heavy gates that stopped traffic back in 1921, horses and carts. And there were also, on each side, there was a wicket gate for pedestrians to go across. But these would obviously lock along with the big gates when trains were going through. But when that happened, there was a footbridge, so pedestrians could still walk over the railway line. So there's no need to even wait or waste time. William White was going to his work at Fraser's. So how on earth was he killed by a train? Well, apparently a shunter train was coming out of Arbroath station and had just gone past heading north when the express train from Aberdeen heading south went by, and White walked from behind the shunter straight into the path of the express. Right, that seems fairly straightforward, we understand that. But how could he have done that if he had the option of walking over the footbridge? Unless the wicket gate wasn't locked. So this is what the inquiry heard. His widow said that the deceased used the wicket gates for 24 years. She was certain that's the way he went to his work. Thomas Deere, an iron dresser, said he saw the deceased open the gates and go through, get hit by the train. Right, this is all pretty clear stuff. William Cowie, a foundry worker, said he saw William White go down the well gate, heading towards the wicket gate. And William Butchett, a plumber, said he saw the deceased approach the wicket gate. So, there we are. The deceased went to the wicket gate. The wicket gate presumably wasn't working. He went through and got hit by a train. But Archibald Simon, the man who drew up the plan, gave evidence and said when he was there drawing up the plans, every time a train went by, the gates were locked. Sergeant Andrew White, local Bobby, said he couldn't open the gate when the train was passing. So what was going on? Alex Finlay, a coalman who was positioned near the signal box, said he saw William White on the cattle bank. Now, the cattle bank is on the other side of the pedestrian bridge, on the Arbroath station side, opposite the signal box. He saw William White on the cattle bank, on railway land where he should not be. And he'd seen him there many times. Well, hold on, this is completely different now. George Potter was the signalman in the box. He had seen William White use the cattle bank. The gates were always locked and were locked when he checked right after the accident. Gordon Fife, the train register boy, said the gates were certainly locked. He was there at the time of the accident. So, we've got a situation where trains are going using the level crossing. The signalman closes the gates to traffic and locks them, and closes and locks the wicket gates. And yet somehow a number of witnesses are adamant that they saw William White use the wicket gate and go through. But at the same time, other witnesses say no, they saw him where he shouldn't be, trespassing on railway land, taking a shortcut through the cattle bank and crossing the railway line that direction. Sheriff Gordon said, "There is a conflict of evidence, and it is for the jury to decide what happened." So, what did the jury decide happened? They decided on the bloomin' obvious. Their decision, their verdict was, quote, "death by accident." Well, there's a surprise. I think everybody knew the poor man had died by accident. But they added a rider that the wicket gates should be locked from the signal box when the signal went down. But everybody says that's what happened. Apart from the people who said they saw him go through the wicket gate. But what about all these people who said he didn't? He took a shortcut over the cattle bank. Well, there's a mystery. And I knew someone who liked a mystery. In 1990, I took this drawing and all this information from the Arbroath Herald, and I visited my mother, who was staying in Arbroath at that time. Coincidentally, the accident happened in 1921, and that was the year of her birth. She liked a mystery, and I showed her this drawing, and we went over the Arbroath Herald report, and we couldn't figure out who was telling the truth, because someone in this sorry saga was either seeing things or some people were lying. So what I thought I would do with my mother was we would drive down to Arbroath station and we would walk up on to the footbridge, which is still there, the old lattice footbridge, and from there you got an excellent view looking down the railway line into the station. To the left was the signal box, still there in 1990, still there today, Arbroath North, if you're into your trains. And to the right was the old cattle bank, which was an area for cattle pens and a platform and a section of railway line where the cattle train could be parked up and loaded with cattle. It was all there like that in 1990, and directly below us were the railway lines going north and south, and just behind us the level crossing, still then with the big gates and the two wicket gates. And we looked at the plan and we read the full inquiry report in the Arbroath Herald to see if we could figure out exactly what had happened. And we couldn't. It was going to remain a mystery. What had happened in 1921 was still going to be a mystery in 1990. And we thought we would leave it at that. When we saw a man standing on the cattle bank. Now how he got there didn't make sense, because the cattle bank hadn't been used in decades probably. It was completely overgrown with brambles and thistles and weeds, but you could quite clearly see the edge of the platform, and that's where this man was standing. We hadn't seen him. We had a full view not only of the cattle bank but of the street behind it. We hadn't seen him going into the cattle bank, far less getting to the edge of the platform, but there he was, standing there. There was something rather odd about him. It was the way he was dressed. He was wearing the kind of clothes that my grandfather would have worn. You know, that heavy black material. He had trousers made out of those, and the jacket was made out of the same material. That thick, heavy, black, whatever it is. My granddad used to wear jackets and trousers like that. Pair of black hobnail boots, and a shirt. The old, I think they became popular in the 60s and 70s. We called them granddad shirts. They had a very short upstand, not a proper collar on them, but an upstand with studs that you could then clip a collar to. Well, he was wearing a shirt like that with no collar, just the studs and the upstand, and a flat cap on his head. He was from a different generation altogether. He was from my granddad's generation, but anyway, there he was, a guy wearing funny old clothes, standing on the cattle bank. And then he jumped down onto the railway line. Of all places, what was he doing? And he crossed the northbound line diagonally, coming towards us. And we just stood looking down, watching him, until he got directly below us on the 6-foot way between the northbound and the southbound railway lines, and at the exact spot on this drawing where William White lay after being struck by the southbound express, he stopped. This man stopped on the exact spot and looked up at us and smiled. A nice, warm, cheerful, happy smile. Why did he do that? And then he looked down and continued walking diagonally across the space between the two railway lines onto the southbound line and underneath where we were standing. My mother and I were speechless. We went to the other side of the footbridge, which is only about 4 feet wide, and looked down to see where he was going. He would have reappeared at the exact spot on this plan where William White was struck by the southbound express. But he didn't appear. We gave him a moment. He wasn't there. We went and looked over the other side. He hadn't gone back. He wasn't underneath the bridge. He had completely vanished. And we were standing there with a clear view all around us, and this man had gone. Neither of us said anything. I was holding the plan, and my mother was holding the report from the Arbroath Herald. I think I said something like, "Shall we go home?" And in complete silence, we walked down the steps off the footbridge to the car, and I drove my mother home. We got home, opened the door, walked in, and my stepfather, Jeff, was sitting at the dining table. He was sitting with his microscope, as I recall, doing a bit of work on his hobby of pond life. And as soon as we walked in, he jumped up and cheerfully said, "Ah, there you are. Let's get the kettle on and hear all about it." And he walked to the kitchen door, put his hand on the door handle and stopped. And he turned around and he said, "What on earth's wrong? You both look as if you've seen a ghost." Had we?